Welcome one, welcome all to the greatest show on earth, the Notaku Anime Chat. I'm your resident circus animal, Setsuken, along with the one who keeps me in line, Guardian Enzo.
Hello there.
So today is a very special episode because it's the one that I think we've been looking forward to for 4 years now because we haven't done one in 4 years. The anime season preview, and this is for the fall 2020 anime season. So we'll be getting into that soon. But before we get into that, I like to start off every week, as Guardian Enzo does, by asking him how he's doing. So, Guardian Enzo, how are you doing this week?
I'm great. I just had a big plate of Szechuan food, so I'm all set to go. In joke there, sorry. It's looking forward to it. Always wish the season we were previewing was better than I think it's going to be, but at least we have a full season to preview this time, which is definitely progress over the last couple, what with COVID and everything else that's been going on. So, looking forward to it. We got a long weekend here because we have a couple of national holidays in Japan next week. So, looking forward to that too.
Awesome, awesome. And I really thought for a second that you were eating spicy food again. I was like, oh, kimchi last week, Szechuan this week. Maybe it's a ritual for you. You just like to load up on the spice before you get going.
Just to make your life as hard as possible.
No, I like it spicy, man. I like it spicy.
Oh,
Okay,
okay.
before I go on some kind of weird innuendo tangent like I seem to do every episode.
Innuendo out the other. You ever hear that one? Innuendo out the other? That's a dad joke. Sorry.
No, no, I heard it. My brain just froze for a second. I like how every time I try to make it dirty and you just class it back up. Well,
Oh,
that one it sounded well, now that I think about it. Okay. Now that I think about it, that actually doesn't sound great either, but anyway,
mm.
let's get into our first section, which is
The anime.
so, our first section this week is actually not what we're watching because we definitely want to dedicate as much time as possible to the season preview. But there are three or four items. Actually, it is just three. Three items that we wanted to really, really talk about because they were big news to not so big news, but definitely notable things that I don't think we wanted to wait till next week for. So we'll just get straight into the anime news. Okay, so let's start with our first story of the week, which is over at Anime News Network, and it is written by
You know who.
our good old friend Rafael Antonio Pineda. So this one is Horimiya romantic comedy manga gets TV anime in January 2021. And the article reads an official website launched on Friday, so that's today, to to announce that Daisuke Hagiwara's Horimiya manga is inspiring a television anime adaptation that will premiere in January 2021. The website also revealed the main cast, staff, and a teaser visual. I'll kind of leave it at that because Guardian Enzo, you were fairly excited about this on Twitter, and if we're being totally honest, the anime news section is literally being brought to you guys this week because of this story. So Guardian Enzo, why is this such a big deal?
Well, I just felt this was appropriate. If we're going to be in a season preview post, I think this is an appropriate story because this is the one that will be leading our winter preview issue for me. Um, it's so rare these days. By the way, just for the record, it's Saturday. Let's get with it. It's not Friday, but yes, in Japan that is. I'm It's so rare these days that we get a anime announcement that really excites me. It feels like I don't want to wait a week to talk about it because it's so fucking rare that it feels like it should get a call out. Horimiya, for those of you who don't know, is a romantic comedy manga. It's much like One Punch Man actually, in that it was originally a web manga. It was called Horisan to Miyamura-kun, by an author called Hiro. So it was a web manga by a mangaka who uses a fake one word name. It eventually got a full manga adaptation where a famous manga artist came in to work with the writer. In this case, someone named Hagiwara Daisuke, who's well known in manga circles, and became a much longer and much more involved story under the name Horimiya. And there was a short and frankly not that good OVA series, like 3 or 4 episodes, that was done like around 2010, 2011, I guess, something like that. No, maybe 2000, maybe 2012, 2013, for the original web manga. And that was it. And that was, uh, it was not enough. And this is a very popular manga. It's not Kimetsu One Piece popular, but it's a very popular manga. It's well respected critically, well respected by fans. It's just a really, it's a really, if you remember Tonari no Kaibutsu-kun, do you remember Tonari no Kaibutsu-kun?
Yes, sir.
Uh, and it's not exactly like that, but there is something of the same sense of maturity to the topic of teenage romance. And it's a really smart manga. It's really extremely open emotionally in a way that Japanese manga often are not. And it's an unusual romance manga in that it doesn't have too much bullshit. It kind of cuts to the chase fairly quickly, and things actually evolve fairly quickly. It's just and it was kind of my assumption, and I think most readers' assumption, that this was never going to get an anime. It's just, oh, that ship has sailed. It's done. So when this happened, it was such a huge surprise that it was like, oh my god, it's like we won the lottery. And plus, it's coming out in January, which is like, well, that was that's very surprising. Makes you wonder if this has been in the books for a while, because you normally wouldn't see a new series announcement for something coming up that soon. And then, so my reaction to this, as you say, I was kind of all over Twitter on this. My reaction was, okay, is this there's 3 bullets I have to dodge. Is it a fake news story? No, it turned out not to be a fake. Is it going to go to Shaft? No, it didn't go to Shaft. And is Kaji Yuki going to be cast to play the lead? And he wasn't. So dodged all those bullets. Ended up getting a pretty solid studio in Cloverworks, which is the spin-off studio from A1 Pictures, but they've been associated with some good stuff. Really good director, Ishihama Masashi, the director of Shinsekai Yori, which was one of my top 10 series of the 2010s. Very different from Horimiya, but nevertheless, a, a good staff. Uchiyama Kogi is the male lead, and the great Haruka Tomatsu as the female lead. Um, it's just it's a great story. It's a great romance. It has a great sibling relationship between the female lead and her brother, and I love great sibling relationships in manga, and we don't see enough of them. Um, it just it's like, wow, it was like I said, it felt like winning the lottery because it was so unexpected. When a series you really really like and you never expect to see get an anime gets an anime, you want to shout that out to the world. And that's kind of how I felt when I heard that Horimiya got an anime. So there you go.
And just for the listeners, the siren's on our end, so don't start freaking out if
Yes,
you're driving or something.
it's Japan. There undoubtedly has been some huge crime here. Like they've probably someone has jaywalked, and so they have to send the sirens and everything. So they're taking care of public safety. Always public safety.
Right, right. So for this series, I am really happy for you. Um, I honestly, just looking at it from a very surface level, it doesn't look that all that special to me. But the way people who've read the manga are super excited about it, and your excitement over it, I'm definitely interested. I don't want to know anything about it now. I just want to go watch it. So I will be on media blackout for this show so that it hits me in the right ways, which is as pure as I can be for it. So,
Okay.
yeah, excited. The staff looks really good. Someday you and I will talk about your hate of Kajiyuki, but that is for another day.
Yes.
Let us move on to the second news item, which is something that I was super excited about. And I think I was one of five people that was surprised that this happened. But this is over at Funimation.com, and it's by Mr. Special Contributor. I don't think they mentioned. Oh, no, by Liam Dempsey, Shy Mander. Um, so this reads continuation of Legend of Galactic Heroes Day Netuse. That's how they say it in the I think it's German, but that's how they say it um in the anime, has officially been announced. So continuation of Legend of Galactic Heroes Day Netuse has officially been announced. Um and the article reads that a video was posted on the Shochiko YouTube channel, which features a slew of characters and quotes from the series. If even if you can't read Japanese, and we'll link the video in the description, the ultra dramatic score is enough to get you hyped for what's next. There's no release date or broadcast info for the sequel series as of yet, but you can catch up on the English dub on Funimation, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so the reason this is super handy is because I really, really, really loved Legend of Galactic Heroes. It was a production IG properly. It's a space opera war story. It's really it's based off a series of novels. And what's interesting about Legend of Galactic Heroes is the fact that it originally got an OVA series that was over 100 episodes, but that did not complete the story. And so then a couple of years ago, they made a remake. Production IG made a remake, and they are actually trying to follow the novels, the original novels, a lot more closely. And so this new version is the version that I've seen. I haven't gone and watched the original, and the reason for that is because I really like the way they've tackled the new series. And I know that a lot of people that love the original will say that's the best version ever, but that's not going to complete the story. My hope is that this will go farther than the original series, and it seems like it's lucrative enough. The first season was a television series. The second one was a bunch of theatrical movies that here in the West we got as a piecemeal episode. So they split up each movie into a bunch of episodes, and we got to see those. And I really enjoyed where it went with where the story went at the end of season two. I wasn't sure because they didn't announce immediately that they were going to do a season three, and it was dependent on how well the movies did. So it seems like the movies did well enough for them to continue the series, and I am just super super excited for this. I love both sides of the conflict and all of that. So if you haven't seen Legend of the Galactic Heroes, Dana Tuesday, go see it. It's one of the better anime to come out in recent memory, and it's a sci-fi series. You've seen this one as well, Guardian Enzo, yes?
Yeah, I have. It's a big deal here. It's super popular. This doesn't surprise me too much. And this is one of those old time, almost like it's almost viewed in the same category as like Gundam and Macross and stuff like that. Even though it's obviously more, well, I don't want to insult Gundam, but I think more intellectual. I think it's fair to say. Um, I like it. I can't say I've ever gotten the same, the same charge out of it that a lot of people, including yourself, seem to. It never, the brilliance of it never quite struck me like the two before in the head, like it does seem to do for a lot of people, which I think puts me in the minority. But at the same time, I quite enjoy it. I like certain characters much, much better than I like other characters. And to some extent, I think that's intentional, and to some extent, I think it's not, which is rather interesting. Um, so, based on my experience, I'm like, yeah, you give me more, I'll certainly be watching it. I feel like there's another part of me that says, you really should like this more than you do. What's wrong with you? But it is what it is. I mean, we only like things as much as we like them, and I like it rather than love it. But at the same time, like I said, you give me more of it, I'll watch it, and I'm glad to see that it's getting continuation.
Yes, sir. So good news all around. And then we'll close out the news section with this little story. Um, and this is more because I'm a huge fairy tale and hero Mashima fan, and I also like Groove Adventure Rave. But this came out, I think it was today or yesterday. I actually found out about it because I follow Mashima Sensei on Twitter. So basically, he announced, and then Konami actually announced that at TGS 2020, which will be an online thing. So that's the Tokyo Game Show for video games. They're actually going to announce a game adaptation of Hiro Mashima's latest manga, Eden Zero. So that was really interesting. The thing that's notable on an anime podcast is this is a manga, and Fairy Tail I'm sure a lot of people have seen. I love it a lot, even with the rather abysmal last season. But the other thing that's interesting is at this stream there is hinting happening that they might also confirm an anime. So it'll be interesting. TGS is going to happen on the 26th at 7 a.m. EDT or 20 JST, which is Japanese Standard Time. So really, really late at night. And it
Hmm.
seems like the TGS 2020 channel is going to, on the 27th, have an English broadcast where they might actually um, talk about some of this stuff. So we'll see. We'll see how it is. If they announce an anime adaptation, I think it's a bit early to do that because Eden Zero doesn't have enough manga volumes yet. And so there's that. I do own all the manga volumes. I haven't read them yet, so I need to go and actually pick up the manga volumes I have on the shelf and see if Eden Zero is uh, any good. But it is science fiction. Any thoughts on Eden Zero? I know you weren't like a huge fairy tale fan, so
Well, my thought on it is I'm never doubted for a minute that Eden Zero would get an anime. It was just a question of when it was going to happen. It's Mashima. It's going to get an anime. That's a given. Um, I liked Fairy Tale. It lost me at some point. It just felt like it got into swimming in syrup kind of thing, where it just kind of felt like it was getting repetitive, and the jokes were repeating themselves, and the scenarios were repeating themselves, and I have to confess that I kind of lost interest in it after a while. My interest in Eden Zero when the manga started was pretty limited. And I will say that I what I have heard about Eden Zero, the reviews, at least on the aggregator sites, are not great for it. But at the same time, I don't know. I didn't read Fairy Tale even. I watched the anime for probably 100 episodes. So, but I didn't read it. I'm not that interested in it. I'll check it out. Honestly, what I remember most about the Fairy Tale anime is, it's very rare that I find anime characters to be truly sexy, but Lucy is one of the sexiest anime characters of all time. I have to say, Lucy is really, I mean, in just in a purely, admiration way. She is the character design, her personality. She's just really sexy. And I don't say that about animated characters, but about Lucy, I'll say it. So I really enjoyed her, and I liked Fairy Tale. I liked Happy, I liked certain of the supporting characters. It just felt like I said, at some point, I just felt like I've seen all this before, and I just lost interest in it. So, um, Eden Zero, I know nothing about it. I have not read any of it. I know the manga started about 2 years ago, so it's probably getting pretty close to the point now where if they wanted to announce an anime, they could probably do it. If they bear in mind, if they make this announcement, they could say, and the anime will be starting in spring 2021. So it's not like this is immediately going to happen. It'll give them 6 more months for manga chapters to pile up, and they might even just say 2021. They might not even specify the season. And again, it's another one of those series. I think you can assume as long as as long as he's writing the manga, as long as he's writing the Eden Zero manga, you'll probably see Eden Zero anime. It'll get completely adapted eventually. So, if you're a fan, I think you have a lot to look forward to here.
yes, and I'm not surprised that you fell off of Fairy Tale around the 100 episode mark. Is I think, or I think close to, yeah. In the middle of the series, they did a filler episode arc, and that's where the quality kind of dropped quite a bit. I even stopped blog. I did blog about 90% of Fairy Tale, but there was a period there where I just skipped a bunch of weeks and then did a combo post. and that was for the filler stuff. So that lost a bunch of people, and then Fairy Tail's quality has its ups and downs. I think season 2 has a really amazing arc, and then the final season is kind of a wash, honestly. But then the ending, just the last episode, is really good. In the same way, I think one of the series we'll talk about later today, it's very similar to that. So, yeah, I think that about does it for the news section. It's a bit shorter this week, and that really is because we want to dedicate a lot of the episode to all the new stuff that's coming soon. So without further ado, let's jump into
Anime Season 3.
all right, everybody. So today, like I said before, we're going to do our anime season preview. And since most of you probably forgot about the last one we did 4 years ago, we're actually going to do this a little bit differently than before. We're actually going to break up our preview into tiers. So, tiers of shows based on how much we're excited about them. And I think that's a good way to kind of at least help you zero in on what we think will be interesting to watch and what we're excited about and what we'll probably be talking about. So, to start that off, the first thing we'll talk about is our most eagerly anticipated series. And I'll kick it over to you, Guardian Enzo. What is your most anticipated series for this next season?
Well, thank you. I will say, just for the benefit of our listeners, the categories are not necessarily the same for both of us. So bear that in mind. Something that's on my highest tier might be on Setsuken's second tier and vice versa. But to start us off, I will say it would have been a tough call for me if Fumetsu no Anata had not been pushed back to next spring, because that was in a dogfight for the top spot for me this season. But with that gone, it's kind of a slam dunk for Golden Kamui season 3, which is, it probably not a huge number of surprises with this at this point, because it is, after all, season 3. But this is a really, really strong, overall, very mature kind of. I love the combination of zany screwball comedy and extreme violence and political intrigue and social commentary with the treatment of the Ainu people. And so the thing is, I guess I would say about Golden Kamui, which, I consider it as an anime probably just like one step short of like a masterpiece. Like it's not Seirei no Moribito, it's not even Vinland Saga, but it is a great consistent show. uh, the animation has gotten better. No more CGI bears. But the main reason I think this show is as good as it is, and I've made this point in my on in my reviews of the series in the past, is that the mangaka, Soda Sensei, not Soda Sensei, what is his name? How can I have forgotten the mangaka's name? I'm so angry at myself. The mangaka is Noda Sensei, Noda Satoru. He writes every character as if they're the main character of their own series. And the more I've thought about that analogy, the more it elegantly, from my point of view, describes why this series works. Every character is a fully fleshed out main character. It just so happens that most of them are supporting in this particular story, but you get the sense that there's a whole story around that person out there, and you're only seeing a little sliver of it when they intersect with the main story of the series, which it's a very hard thing to write that way, and he deserves a lot of credit for that. He and the mangaka of Vinland Saga are friends, and they've had like a lot of sort of mutual admiration over the years, and it's not surprising when you think about the nature of these two series. Golden Kamui, for me, you know what you're going to get at this point, but I like what that is, so definitely my number one pick for the season.
Yes. So Golden Kamuy is actually my number one pick as well. So this is how you guys know that we don't like completely talk about every episode before we record. So if Guardian Enzo hadn't mentioned it, it would have been my topic as well. And it is, it's number one for me. And I think a lot of what you mentioned, I agree with. One of the things that I like about this show is how unique it is, how it covers like a specific tribe in Japan, like an indigenous people to a particular area, the Ainu. So I think that is really unique. I love how they take historical Japanese figures and they kind of meld that in with the story as well. It's I've been trying to get a lot more people to watch Golden Kamui, and one of the reasons I've been hesitant in the past is because I wasn't sure we were getting a season 3. Because for those of you who haven't seen it, season 2 kind of ends at a point where I feel like the story has kind of just gotten into the crux of the issue, if you were to say it that way. Really, the story is about to begin now. The first 2 seasons are excellent chapter 1, almost like a prologue, but they also develop the characters and they tell a pretty great story from, I think, the first part of the series to the second part. But what's exciting about this and why I'm so excited about it is A, I didn't expect Golden Kamuy to get a season 3, a continuation, and B, I don't think enough people watched it honestly or talked about it beyond, I think, our circles, Guardian Enzo. So it's really exciting. It's got a very unique flavor, and uniqueness, as we've discussed quite often, is something that's hard to find in anime these days. Wouldn't
It
you agree?
Yeah, it is. And even distinctiveness is hard to find, so uniqueness even more so. I will say that it's interesting that you mentioned that because it has I did expect a third season because this has been to some extent a commercial hit, and that I find really interesting because it is a rare exception that it doesn't check any seemingly obvious boxes to be a commercial hit. What I used to talk about the House of Pies a lot, for those of you who know the Los Angeles area, the famous House of Pies. But that was my analogy for the anime industry. Basically, there are certain slices of the pie, and those are the only ones that make money, and some slices are bigger than other slices. This doesn't really seem to fit into the pie anywhere, and yet it has managed to do quite well commercially, had a lot of merchandising tie-ins, and even done well on disc sales. And I don't know exactly why it's been a hit, as off kilter and as skewed as its perspective on the world is, but uh, I'm glad that it has. So, and that's why it got a third season, because it has been pretty commercially successful. In fact, I'm not going to go on the record as being sure of it, but I will be surprised. And I don't know how long Noda is going to keep writing either, but I'll be surprised if it doesn't get a complete adaptation over the course of several years. So I don't think this will be the last season either.
That is the dream. That is the dream. A complete adaptation. Okay, so enough said. Golden Kamui. If you haven't seen the first 2 seasons, take a look, and then Guardian Enzo. Are you going to be blogging this one
Oh, of course,
potentially?
of course, of course.
Okay. So yeah, just follow his blogs once you catch up. I will not be blogging it. I'll just leave it to Guardian Enzo because he did a pretty good job with the last season. All right. So with that said, let's move on to my number 2, which I will probably assume is not Guardian Enzo's number 2, number 3, or number 4, which is Machi season 3. Or I'm not even gonna try and remember the long English title. I think it's like, is it wrong to pick up girls in a dungeon? Something, something, something. But the season 3 of this, I'm eagerly excited because A, it's a sequel. B, I'm very invested in the franchise at this point. I've seen the 2 seasons, the movie. I think they do a pretty decent job. Um, it's based off a light novel, so for those of us who like light novels, you're gonna enjoy this. It's not an isekai. It is a traditional fantasy with a little bit of RPG elements, I think, which is probably why I enjoy it. I'm a huge gamer and I like the whole concept of, this big dungeon that the characters have to try and conquer and get to the bottom of, and it's super hard, and there's this whole economy that's spawned around this dungeon. So, I mean, if you've seen stuff like Magi and stuff like that, there's pieces of that in there. There's other things, and then there's obviously some of the fan servicey bits, and some of the more crass stuff that I am not as much of a fan of. Um, Last season, they definitely toned up the sexualization to 11 a little bit, and I think that might be one of the reasons why it's continuing to succeed both overseas in Japan and over here in the West. But yeah, I'm excited about it. Not too much more to say. It's a sequel, and I'm happy to see the story continue, especially given how much they're starting to really jump into the mythos and develop those in the last 2 seasons. Gardenenzo, any thoughts on Don Machi?
Not really. It's a big success. It's commercially so. Again, this is not going to be the last season. It'll keep going. I watched a few, probably 3 or 4 episodes of the first season, got bored, dropped it. So I don't have a lot to say about it. Honestly, it's not my cup of tea. But if you're a fan of this show, I think you can look forward to probably multiple additional seasons of it.
Yes, it is very successful. So speaking of successful, slight spoiler there. Guardian Enzo, what is your and my third pick? Because we both did talk about this a little bit. What is the third pick?
Yeah, I mean, for me, this actually probably would not be quite as high on my list as it is on yours, but it's not through any slight. It's just because I feel like I kind of know what to come with it. But another sequel, all of the first category here, we're doing our sequels. This is Haikyuu season. Not only is it a sequel, but it's part two of a sequel. It's season 4, part two of a split core. Haikyuu is Haikyuu. It's I really enjoy it. It single handedly made volleyball a hugely popular sport with teenagers and kids in Japan, especially girls. It's probably in production IG's hands, arguably at least we'll say the most beautifully drawn and animated sports anime in TV history. I really like this show. I'm not madly in love with Haikyuu. I don't think it's especially deep or it doesn't have a lot of complexity to it, but the characters are likable, the situations are mostly interesting, the competitions tend to be quite good. Even though what I really like about it is even though it's a Shonen Jump sports manga, it doesn't fall victim to that typical Shonen Jump sports manga nonsense where everything becomes a giant Prince of Tennis or Kuroko no Basket fantasy world. It's fairly grounded in reality. um, Likable main character in Hinata. He's the undersized main character. The undersized boy is kind of a stock sports manga lead, but I really enjoy his take on it. And I thought that the first part of season 4 went into some interesting directions with Hinata's character. And one of the things that I do like about Haikyuu is that while I don't think it's super complex, you are seeing development, especially with Hinata, who's becoming a more interesting person as he sort of grows into his talent mentally. And he's showing some interesting sides of himself that we didn't necessarily see before. So again, what does it have in common? Golden Kamuy to a smaller extent, Denmachi huge, Haikyuu huge. They're all sequels, but they're all really commercially successful. Haikyuu is a hugely successful property. The manga did just end. For those of you who don't know, it ended not that long ago. But the anime will not finish in this core. There's no way. There's too much manga still left. So we'll get a season 5 at some point, probably next year beginning, and that will most likely take us to the end of the manga.
Yes. So Haikyuu, it's interesting that you mentioned that Haikyuu is a little bit lower on your list. For me, that was true for a long time. So I like Haikyuu a lot. I think it does what any successful shonen does, which is it really makes the hype moments really exciting. It creates tension. It makes you root for the characters. So that's one of the things that I think it does exceedingly well. But one of the thing it never really rose above itself for me. It never really rose out of that sports shonen mantra for me until last season. And you mentioned they did some interesting things with Hinata. That's what I wasn't expecting. I wasn't expecting them to do that kind of weird thing. And when I watched that, I felt like that was Haikyuu raising the bar a
Mm.
little bit, and it definitely impressed me to the point where I think I'm really excited about Haikyuu for the first time ever. Because every season I'd be excited to be like, oh, nice, another Haikyuu season. This season I'm like, okay, I really want to see how they build up and build from what they spent really the first part of the fourth season doing. So that's why I'm super excited about it. It's rare, and I will say, to your point earlier, I think this season is interesting because normally I have a lot more series just in general than you in this category, but even I had to like really push myself, and The only one that I would say for sure that I was like, yes, I really, 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 really want this now was Golden Kamuy.
Me
The
too.
other two, yeah, the other two, I'm more like, well, I'm a little bit more excited for them than all the other stuff we're going to talk about. So it was just more of a question of just slotting them above. But I think most of the people that are listening to this have either heard of those series or seen them. And if you haven't, then I think you'll really, really enjoy catching up to these series. But before we move on, Guardian Enzo, I do want to talk about one thing that you mentioned,
Sure.
which was the fact that these are all sequels. I want to talk about that a little bit. How does it feel, especially compared to previous seasons and previous years? Because fall is generally the big season of the year, right? That's when we get the most anime, generally speaking. It's fall and it's spring.
Mm,
So, how do you feel like this fall compares in some ways to stuff we've gotten before? Obviously, there's some COVID stuff in there, but
right.
just curious what you think about all that.
Yeah, before I answer that question, and I'm glad you raised it because I think it's really important that we talk about our takes as the season as a whole. I want to say with Haikyuu, this kind of shows you how Setsuken and I are a little out of sync with the zeitgeist because, well, both he and I felt that that first part of season 4 was a level up because of where it went with Hinata. Among most viewers of the show, that was not a popular turn of events. A lot of people seem to think that was like, oh, this is so dragging on, blah blah blah. And so there you go. I mean, there is not any sort of intentional going against the grain there. It's just I think perspectives are a little different. So what he or I may feel like is a positive development, a lot of fans may feel just the opposite, and that's all part of art. There's nothing wrong with that. As far as the season as a whole, I'm with you. I had to stretch to come up with. That's why losing Fumetsu, and we talked about Fumetsu a little bit last week. Losing that was a major blow. As you said, spring and fall typically are the two biggest anime seasons. Summer has been a sleeper in the last few years with a lot of good shows sneaking in, but summer this year was basically a washout because of COVID. Um, I don't think it's a good season. I managed to preview a significant number of shows, 17 on my website, but maybe at most 3 or 4 of those are shows I'm genuinely really hopeful could be really good. The rest of them are all just kind of like shots in the dark pretty much. So there's a decent volume of series, about 48 new series this season, which is kind of the new normal. There was a big drop off starting about 3 years ago. We saw like a 25 to 30% drop off in the number of anime that were being produced every season as a year over year. It used to be spring and fall you'd get in the 60s. Now it's in the mid to high 40s seemingly. But comparing it with like over the last 10 years, and I just did a 10-year retrospective on at the end of the decade of my top 20 shows, so I looked at a lot of my out of my season list when I was doing that. 2020, COVID or no COVID, is not a good year, and this is not a good fall compared to most. A couple shows may step in and surprise us, but my general take of the season as a whole is a lot of mediocrity and not a lot of cream at the top. Decent volume of shows, but better quantity than quality.
Yeah, I think I almost exclusively, and this has been happening for a few seasons now, but I almost exclusively am excited for sequels now more than anything, which is kind of sad, I think, in some ways, because I miss the days when I would look at a preview for a PV, a promotional video for something that was new, and I'd be like, yes, I think this is going to be the next big thing, and I don't think I can confidently say that about any series this season, which I think is where I think we're both kind of on the same page here. I
Mm.
know I'll say one thing to the listeners. I know it seems like we're dire a lot of the time, and I think I'm at least cognizant of that. So I will say,
Oh, I'm cognizant.
yeah, yeah. But I don't like to be super negative in some ways, and
No.
so I do want to balance it out by saying that I am super excited for this new season, and it does feel like anime is kind of bouncing back after the whole COVID thing. So there's good things to be excited about, and I think as we transition to talking about the rest of these shows, there is always a chance, and that is my favorite feeling in anime. I don't know how you feel, Guardian Enzo, but I love it when a series will blow me away and surprise me It will look from the outset to be very generic or very boring, and it will just completely exceed expectations.
Well, one of the things I do in my preview every season is the sleeper section, and I love the sleeper section, but only when I can get some stuff in it. Um, I take a lot of pride in being pretty good at picking sleepers. So my track record, at least from my tastes, is pretty good. I think I've done a pretty good job picking sleepers out. So yeah, I love that too. My issue is really that I don't see a lot on this schedule that has that sort of potential. And I, like you, I don't like sounding overly negative, but I am just being honest. I don't see a lot of that big, huge upside potential on this schedule. But I will say, this statement of non-sequels and we're nothing really that I'm excited about that isn't a sequel, that's not going to be true for winter 2021.
All right. So, speaking of which, let's dive into the rest of the shows we want to talk about because I do think there are some things that I am mildly excited about. And it's kind of like for me seeing an old friend that, I haven't met in a while, and I'm at least excited to catch up with them. So, with that said, let's transition over to
Moderately curious.
all right, so now that we've talked about the known quantities, or semi known quantities at least, let's talk about all the new stuff and the stuff that we're not as sure about, but definitely intrigued by. So, this is our moderately curious about section, and here we'll talk about a bunch of series that, are coming in the new season and that we'll check out and give a chance. And, Guardians, what I want to do for these is if it's an original series, I want us to at least mention the studio and talk a bit about the director beyond the premise. So I'll be a good host and kick it over to you first. Tell me what series you're moderately curious about. Give me one of them.
Well, my first series that I want to talk about in this category actually is, if I'm being totally honest, it probably would have been ranked above Haikyuu for me in anticipation this season. Although I wouldn't have put it in my top tier. That's just a reflection of that the top tier was a little bit of a stretch for me this fall. But this is Tonikaku Kawaii, which is over at Seven Arcs, which has done some pretty good shows actually. It's not a super well known studio, but they've done some pretty good shows in the last couple of years. And Tonikaku Kawaii, the biggest name for many anime fans associated with this will be Hata Kenjiro, who is the original author. And Hata Kenjiro, for those who don't know, is the creator of Hayate no Gotoku, which is Hayate the Combat Butler, as it's known in English, which was I think by any standard, a pretty big hit. And that's not what drew me to it, because honestly, I'm not a huge Hayate fan. I didn't dislike it. I didn't love it. It was just kind of okay. But Tonikaku Kawaii is my next most anticipated show for the season because I have read some of the manga, and frankly, it's very good. It's a rom-com. It's a romance series that is pretty short on bullshit because it cuts to the chase. There's a marriage theme to this story right from the very beginning. In fact, I don't want to get into too much detail, but I mean, even if you read the synopsis, you'll see it. I mean, there's a marriage proposal in chapter 1, so it's not a big shocker. But it's got some interesting magical reality, possibly twists, and but the characters are genuinely likable. It's a rom com about a relationship rather than an endless build up to a relationship, and it's an unusual relationship. And like I say, I like it better than Hayate myself. I think it's significantly a better series. It doesn't have a magnificent a staff that you look at it and you say, "Oh my God, these are all legends." But it's got a competent staff, a competent studio, and it's not the sort of manga I feel that requires a lot of reinvention in order to be successful. So the only thing is the manga is ongoing, and it's only been, I think, less than 3 years, so it's probably about 7 or 8 volumes at this point. So clearly, we're going to have an anime adaptation that stops in the middle of the story. So it'll be interesting to see what they choose to do with that. But if you like romantic comedy, that's really about likable characters with a little bit of distinctiveness to them, I think Tonikaku Kawaii is a show that could really work for you.
Yeah, so this one I wasn't super excited about it. at first, and one of the reasons for that was the fact that it was from the mangaka that did Hayate no Gotoko, and I really liked Hayate no Gotoko for the first 13 or 14 episodes. I would say it was a straight up hilarious comedy, I felt. But then this was a series back in the day when even comedy series could get like 50 episodes. And I think 50 episodes was just way too much for that series because the jokes started to drag and drag and drag. And it got to the point where I really wanted some progress. And I think then they did a season 2 where the progress almost like shot up to 11. It became almost a different series. It became kind of like a harem show, at least for what I saw it. And I never finished season 2, I think, because I was pretty convinced that the girl that I was backing wasn't going to be the winner. So um, this one excites me for the simple reason that it is cutting away from the bullshit, as you said. It's not about that build up, and it's not about other characters leading other people on and missed feelings and stuff like that. Maybe there is elements of that in there, but I think just the fact I appreciated, what was that show, the one with the three the society where the two, where everybody's mate was predetermined. Did you ever watch that one? Ooh, I'm forgetting what
It
it is.
doesn't ring a bell.
It was an Amazon series,
Hmm.
but basically there was this series a while ago where um, the main character basically falls in love with somebody, but then in this society,
Oh
everybody's mate
yeah,
is
yeah, yeah,
predetermined
yeah. I remember
forever.
that. I remember that. I don't remember what it was called. I kind of liked it. That was I remember that it was in the kind of like it category for me.
Yeah, yeah. And the thing I liked about it was the fact that it just got right into it with from the first episode. So the fact that this with the synopsis and all the other stuff, the fact that it echoes that stuff has me definitely curious. And maybe you never know. Maybe he really will hit a home run with this series. So
The manga's
it's
good. The
exciting.
manga's good. It's a more serious tone than Hayate in my estimation, just for the record. It's got comedic elements, but I think it's more. I don't think it's as madcap, let's say, as Hayate could be.
All right, cool, cool. So for my first series or the second series that we'll talk about, I want to talk about something that was really interesting. Every now and then there will be a series that just has a really interesting and zany premise, and just the premise itself can kind of sell you on what is happening. So in that case, the one I want to talk about is Yukako no Moriarty, or Moriarty the Patriot, is I think the English title. And this is actually a series where instead of focusing on Sherlock Holmes, the story is going to focus on the antagonist, or Sherlock Holmes' greatest antagonist and enemy, Moriarty, and the whole story is really from his perspective. So I'm interested to see what they do with this premise. I think this is something that I'm surprised no Hollywood movie or series or anything has done, but it's a really neat idea. And I'm all for that period of London, England, honestly, and that whole time period where Sherlock Holmes was kind of a thing. And then obviously, murder mystery and that kind of stuff is interesting. Obviously, this will be more, I think, underground crime, but I'm certainly excited about it. And the fact that Production IG is involved with it also has me excited. And then we have Kazuya Nomura as the director, who did Robotic Notes, which I think we both liked decently enough.
Mm.
And then Joker Game he did, which I know you didn't like because of its politics, but I loved it for its pure entertainment value. And he's also been a story. So he, like many other directors that we'll cover today, he's done storyboards and key animation on a ton of different titles. And so he's like most directors, he's done his time. I think, yeah, I think he did he's worked on the storyboards for 91 Days. He's done Bona no Zamdo. He's been both an animation director and a key animator. So that I'm super excited about. What are your thoughts on this series?
Yeah, it's in that same category for me. It's definitely near that the top of that best of the rest category, and an interesting unknown. Another member of the staff here that I want to call out is Kishimoto Taku, who is the writer who's adapting it. And I have sort of an unofficial slot on my schedule, which is shows like Mayonaka and Kitsutsuki Tante Dogoro and Fugo Keiji this season, The Millionaire Detective. It's these uh, quirky sign-in-ish shows that tend to get totally ignored by almost everybody, but I really like, and they're never my favorite show of the season, but they're always interesting and have a very kind of personal, very character driven, and almost always Kishimoto Taku is the one who writes to handle series composition here. So he's doing series composition for this as you would expect. He's anime's go-to guy for this. The interesting twist on this for me is that it's really about Moriarty being somebody who's all about blowing up Victorian social norms and the class system, the rigid class system that reigned supreme in Victorian times, and some in Britain would say still does. So, which I find is an interesting twist, casting Moriarty really out and out as a subversive. Anime has had an interesting obsession with Holmes in recent years. I mean, I would say it cycled from Oda Nobunaga to Holmes, but anime is still pretty obsessed with Oda Nobunaga. Oda as a dog, Oda as a cute girl. I mean, so Oda is anime's main fixation as historical figures go, and Sherlock Holmes isn't even a real historical figure, but he is somebody that anime has had a total fixation on in the last couple of years. There's been so many Holmes related series, most of them frankly not very good, but I have high hopes for. It's also production IG, we should add, which is generally speaking, at least if you're not talking about some CGI crap like the new Ghost in the Shell, it's a guarantor of pretty decent visual quality. So I'm gonna say, yeah, for me, Yukoku no Moriarty is a likewise pretty high expectation show.
Yes. Yeah, and I agree. It's not just anime either, it's video games as well. I think one of the Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney games that was set in medieval Japan. They also, at the same time period as Sherlock Holmes, they had a Sherlock Holmes as well, and Watson was the lolly character in that one. So they do weird stuff like that with their historical figures and their fictional characters. But yeah, for sure. So Moriarty, definitely interesting. I like the anti-hero angle as well. What's your next one?
My next one is Ikebukuro Westgate Park, which is a show that was COVID delayed and has finally joined us now. I think it was originally even scheduled in spring, if I'm not mistaken, and commonly known in Japan as IWGP. And it's commonly known because even though it's just breaking into anime now, this is a very, very well known thing in Japan. It's by Doga Kobo, another one of those studios that has done some very good work in recent years, although it isn't considered a top tier studio. The main thing with IWGP, it was originally a novel series, but it achieved huge, and I mean seriously, huge success as a live action TV show about 20 years ago. It was what we call, I don't know if they still use this term, we used to call it a water cooler show. That's what this was in Japan. It was a show that high school kids and office workers and they would talk about it the next day. Did you see IWGP last night? Did you see what happened? That kind of thing. So it's interesting to see this get an anime treatment, and it's set in Ikebukuro as you would anticipate, and as everything set in Ikebukuro seemingly is. It's about street gangs and crime and such, that whole Durarara vibe, and that just, Ikebukuro is kind of a rough and tumble by Japanese standards part of Tokyo, very working class, sizable Yakuza presence. It also happens to be the epicenter for female otaku in much the same way Akihabara is for male otaku. There's a ton of stores, catering to their interests. So it's an interesting one. Again, not anybody we would call a legend on the staff, but just a pretty solid staff of veteran people who have been around for quite a while. The director did some work on shows like Vinland Saga and Working. Probably the most famous show they've done recently is Seiwaka Katsuni no Senko-san, which is, if you remember Senko-san, the fox spirit who came to the office, to the salaryman and comforted him, which is kind of a fun, a fun little show. His name is Koshida Tomoaki. So that's my next one, IWGP. And again, it looks interesting enough on its own, but the main interest level for me is the fact that it is something that's culturally an icon in Japan based on a live action TV show. So I'm very interested to see where they take it.
Yeah, this series is really unique in that generally either things will get adapted into live action or anime, or there'll be a synergy effect kind of thing. But it's rare for something to get adapted as a live action first and then go to an anime. I'm sure there's cases of it, but in recent memory for me, I haven't seen it. So that was exciting. I would probably be more excited about this if I hadn't been so horribly burned by Durarara, which did focus a lot on gangs in Ikebukuro. And so that was one of the reasons why I was just kind of like, there's a visceral kind of thing. But, this is probably what inspired Durarara.
Yes,
If
I was
you're
just going to say a lot of people feel that IWGP was the direct inspiration for Durarara. So
right. So that I'm excited about. Like you mentioned, the director has done some interesting stuff. One of the things that stood out to me is that he's been an episode director on stuff like Vinland Saga, working like you mentioned. So there's definitely some talent there. And then the original creator, I think he's only ever done I think he's done a couple of other there's Akihabara Deep and 14 and some other stuff, but nothing too notable for me here. This is definitely very unique. I like gang related shows, so I'm excited. And it seems like there is one main character, which will be a nice change of pace from Durarara,
mm.
where there was multiple characters and multiple things to focus on. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it goes. And it's based off a novel this time, so that'll also be very, very interesting. All right. So moving on then, the next one, which is our first shonen manga adaptation, which is Jujutsu no Kaisen. And this one is being animated by Mappa. But the interesting thing here is somebody that I think people who've been watching God of High School this season will be familiar with, which is Sung Hoo Pak, is the director. And he's a Korean, which is interesting. And he's been around in the industry. He's done key animation, animation directing roles, storyboarding for basically a lot of the big properties. So if you're a fan of Garo, which I am, he's been intimately involved with that series. Did the movie? He directed the movie, which was really good. He also directed Garo Vanishing Line, which while visually amazing was kind of eh. God of High School is also kind of eh from a story side standpoint, but you know, that's why I'm kind of hesitant about it. But it's got a shonen manga and it's got demons and it's got martial arts in it. So it looks like with the premise and the way it is, it looks like it might be really, really good, or it might just be kind of okay and your standard demon shonen thing. So what's your read on this, Guardian Enzo?
Well, I want to also just say for the record, Tonikaku Kawaii is a shonen manga. It's just not a shonen jump manga, and it's not a shonen action manga. So there's shonen is a big tent. But yeah, this is our first, classic, demons or fighting game or the Shonen Jump angle. Jujutsu Kaisen is. I kind of thought, to a certain extent, I thought this about Kimetsu too. So I can't really trust my own judgment on this. My sense of Jujutsu Kaisen is it's not a super popular Shonen Jump title, kind of in the mid tier, and Mappa would be a studio that sort of reflects. You can usually tell how much Shueisha is intending to get out of a property by what studio and what kind of staff they put into it. And you could tell that, like with Boku no Hero and with Kimetsu, they were expecting those to be big profitable shows because they went with very high end studios to make them. This one is kind of more of a mid tier studio. Honestly, I have not read a single chapter. The reviews I've read of Jujutsu Kaisen are kind of it's fine kind of reviews, kind of in the World Trigger, range, that kind of thing. And no offense to fans of World Trigger. So I'm expecting it to be okay. I'm not. It's in my mid tier too. I just because of the fact that it is a Shonen Jump title, and I'm always curious about those. But I don't have huge anticipation like you with Sunghoon Park. I don't remember much about Garo, but my God of High School take is very much yours. It's very interesting visually and super mess story wise, which I don't think you can necessarily blame on the director. So the fact that he's associated with this, I don't take as a negative per se, because I do think he has an interesting visual style. And it's always interesting when you see non-Japanese directors in anime roles. I think that's something we should, that's a positive. But yeah, I'll watch it. I'm not expecting a ton out of it, but I'll watch it. That's kind of my view.
Yeah, the one interesting thing that I should mention that I forgot to at the outset was that Crunchyroll is co-financing this,
Yes.
which also is interesting. They did the same thing for God of High School. They did the same thing for Rising of Shield Hero and a bunch of other properties. So I think maybe this is something that they expect will be more popular in the West. But also with that, and I think they also did they did do Doctor Stone as well. So, but with that, with Crunchyroll kind of co-financing it, that also kind of dampens my excitement a little bit because a lot of those shows will be kind of hit or miss on the budget side of it. But it's Mappa, and I think Mappa isn't like a terrible studio. I think they just take on too much these days. But it'll be interesting to see. So, yeah, Jujutsu no Kaisen, I think we'll both see if it becomes the next Kimetsu no Yaiba or if it becomes the next World Trigger, which World Trigger's anime didn't do that story any favors with how it was adapted. Anyway, what is next for you, Guardian Enzo?
Next for me is another sequel, Osumatsu-san third season from our friends at Studio Pierrot, who are still sitting on Kingdom. Damn them. Osumatsu-san, when the first season came out, it became not a hit, a monster, a huge, colossal hit, which frankly surprised the hell out of me. It was, it's a reboot of an old kid show from 30 years ago, which was itself a reboot of a manga from even earlier. I think this is actually the third version of it. This version, of course, they brought in Fujita Yoichi to direct and Matsubara Sho to write, and they're both associated with some wacky comedic stuff. And they took like Gintama most prominently, but they took a very irreverent and almost hentai at times take on this, and it's funny. I really liked the first season. There were a couple of episodes, one in particular focusing on Jushimatsu and his who is the zany, really kind of whacked out baseball obsessed kid. But he's the one. But he had an interesting encounter with a woman, and the whole episode about that, which I thought was really great. There's been one or two really, really great episodes every season. I really enjoy the supporting characters, especially the iconic Iyami is my favorite, but Dion is also very funny in limited doses. I just kind of felt like the creators did not expect this to be the hit that it turned out to be. And I think they were surprised by it. And I think you could sort of feel in the second season and the movie that they were kind of like almost making fun of the fact that how played out the joke was. So I kind of felt like they were ready to be done with this, but I guess financial considerations went out. And even though the second season wasn't nearly as big a hit as the first season, almost nothing could be. It was still successful. So we get a third season. So I'll be watching, and I suspect it'll be intermittently quite funny. But I do feel like there's sort of a general downward trend in the commitment level of the staff on this, and I think it shows through in the content to an extent. So that's my take on Osamatsu-san. In a better season, maybe it wouldn't be quite as high up, but it's definitely something I'm curious to see. And I expect it to be funny. There will be funny moments, no question about it.
So, since I've not seen this series, I'll just ask you a couple of questions
Sure.
to satisfy my curiosity. A, would you recommend if I missed out on this series or if somebody missed out on the series, they go back and watch the first season and catch up?
Well, sure, because I think the first season is the best season. So if you're going to do anything with Osamatsu-san, I would watch the first season. And if the first season doesn't work for you, I think it's a pretty safe bet the second and third, even though the third hasn't aired yet. But I think if the first season doesn't work for you, it's pretty safe bet that the second and probably third won't either. So yes, absolutely. But the one thing I would say about that is the first episode of is very atypical for what the rest of the series is. It's intentionally sort of a fake out. So don't watch the first episode and assume that's what Osamu-san is. The first episode is like is an intentionally out of character introduction, and then you have to watch 2 or 3 episodes in to really get an idea of what sort of show it is.
I see. Yeah, because I really liked Gintama, and when you said hentai humor, you meant perverted, right? Not like the pornography
Well,
end
it
of it,
gets
right?
yeah. I mean, I would have said if I meant etchy, I would have said etchy. And etchy is called etchy, by the way, because it's the first letter of H is the first letter of hentai. So it really is in that sense. It's like a little piece of hentai, but not nearly the whole thing. Uh, it gets pretty close. Whatever the borderline between etchy and hentai is, there are times on the TV show and the movie where Osamatsu-san gets pretty close to whatever that line is. It's definitely not a hardcore porn kind of thing. It's not that, but it's very dirty. It's very
Oh
dirty.
wow.
Yeah, and
Not
in a comedic way, in a comedic way, and
okay,
yeah,
okay.
yeah, yeah, for sure. It gets pretty close to the full. I mean, it's not hentai, but it gets pretty close to hentai at times, in a comedic way.
In a comedic way.
Yeah.
Now I'm kind of curious. All right. Well, we'll definitely, if any of you watch this series, report back and maybe tell me if I should watch it or not. Because I'm still a little bit on the fence. But speaking of on the fence or probably getting impaled by it,
Hmm.
um, the next series I want to talk about is Higurashi, or the 2020 version of it, which is the new anime project that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, I think, on the
We
news.
did.
So this is coming out this season. It's by Passion Studio. And what I want to talk about with Passion, because I honestly didn't recognize the studio, but then I realized they did do one or two series that I enjoyed. I the guilty pleasure of mine that my friends will never let me hear the end about is Rail Wars. I liked that enough to watch the whole series. And then Roka no Yusha was the big one that they did. Obviously different directors and stuff like that, but that was a very competently done show. And then they've done a lot of etchy series. So mileage may vary there. As for the director for this one, Keiichiro Kawaguchi, and he's done a bunch of things that I'm a huge fan of. He did Hayate no Gotoko. He did Sket Dance, which was very much like Gintama, but in high school. A very good series. It was he did the Tonegawa spin-off from Kaiji, and then he also did my one of my series that I think I'll talk about again sometime, Nyan Koi, uh, old harem show that I wish had gotten a continuation. So he's done all of that, and then also he's done storyboards on stuff like Shakugan no Shana, and even done key animation for Great Teacher Onizuka. As for Higurashi itself, I'm definitely a bit trepidatious. I don't know if we actually need a new series, but it's Higurashi, so I can't not watch it. But I'm going into it very cautious and curious and wondering why this is even happening. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, I will mention about Kawaguchi Sensei is he also directed Hayate no Gotoku, which we talked about earlier, and he also did the Hunter x Hunter movie, The Last Mission, which was not a huge fan favorite with fans of the series, but I thought was pretty good. So I think you've got a pretty competent director here. It's interesting that they've gone away from Dean, which is still alive and well as far as I know. So it's interesting that they changed studios with this franchise. Like you, I'm not convinced we had to have another Higurashi, but I'm interested. I watched. This was another COVID delayed show, by the way. I've watched all the Higurashi anime that's been out there. I haven't done any of the original games or anything, but I've watched all the anime. They've ranged to me from genuinely really really creepy and scary and fascinating to outright awful. So I'm just curious to see where on the spectrum this one falls. I think there's only kind of so many different ways you can reimagine what is eventually essentially the same plot twist, which is why I don't necessarily feel like there will ever be such a thing as an essential Higurashi remake reboot. But the character designs are kind of way different this time. I'm curious. New studio, new character designs, new directors. You know, it's a studio. It's a franchise I have some history with as an anime fan, quite extensively. So I have a genuine sense of curiosity. Not necessarily expecting it to be anything great, but certainly curious to see where it goes.
All right, cool, cool. Yeah, I think we're both interested in Higurashi, so yeah, we'll see how it goes. I'm very curious. And speaking of curious shows,
Mm.
I'm gonna do another spoiler. I apologize, but I can't not do a segue between this series being a sequel and something that we think is maybe not as necessary, and what you're gonna talk about next, which is
Hanyo no Yashahime, the Inuyasha reboot, which we talked about a couple weeks ago, actually. So I don't want to rehash all the stuff we talked about there, but essentially the same thing. My view on this is when I look at this, I see Last Exile Fam. I don't have a lot of optimism for this, but because it's Inuyasha, I couldn't possibly not be at least in the mid tier category. I have a sense of rubbernecking traffic accident sort of curiosity about it. Uh, for those who didn't hear our earlier discussion, who don't know, Rumiko is not writing this. She helped out with the character designs, but she's not writing any of it. Uh, it looks to me like trying to cash in on the Inuyasha franchise by reimagining it as a cute girls doing cute things series. Uh, my expectations are low, frankly. I don't think it's necessary. I'm not dissatisfied with the way the Inuyasha anime, the final act part of it that finally came after all those years we had to wait for it. Once we got that, I was pretty satisfied with the ending. Inuyasha is an important series to me. It's a formative series for me, both as a manga and as an anime fan. I don't I'm not going to feel violated if I hate this because it's original. I don't think it has anything. It's not going to change my love or my reservations about Inuyasha, no matter what it does. But I will need some convincing to be convinced that it needs to exist in the first place. But hey, it's Inuyasha. I mean, how can you not be curious, right?
yeah, I'm curious about it. But I also will wait to hear from you because I know you're going to watch it. I'll just see what you think about it and then maybe give it a shot. Because, yeah, Last Exile fam vibes. I was not as happy with Kanketsu Hen, I think it was, the final chapter, as you were. I felt it was super, super truncated and very compressed. And I felt like after I had devoted 167 episodes to the series, I felt a little cheated
Mm.
with how quick everything was and how they skipped over a bunch of really important things. I felt like that they
Yeah.
just recapped in the first few minutes. But that maybe points to how much I like the original series. And as for this, I will say it's interesting that I think Inuyasha has had, because of how long it was, it's had a rotating bunch of directors, but this is not the director that's he's been involved. I think he's episode directed a few
Yeah.
episodes,
Yeah.
but he's not the main director of either of the two previous incarnations. So that's interesting to note.
Yeah, and just for the record, I agree with you. When I say I like the ending, I literally mean the ending. I thought the ending
Oh,
was
I see.
fine. Yes, the final act, I think they gave it 25 episodes or something like that. It was way too short, and it did cut out a lot of the manga. Uh, Frankly, I would have much rather seen a Brotherhood style full retelling where they gave the manga a complete treatment. And that would have interested me a hell of a lot more than this because there is, as you say, a lot of good and important stuff that they cut out of the manga, especially and not only in final chapter, but especially in the final chapter. And if they remade it and put all that stuff back in, which is kind of what happened with Brotherhood, I would been yeah, great, bring it on. I'm really interested to see that. This,
Yeah, I will say before we move on that Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood just eternally ruined a lot of sequels like this for us, I think, because I felt the same way about, I don't know, Exorcist and a bunch of other shows. And you always wish for anything that got shortchanged in its first run through and is a great manga or a great story, you always wish that there was a Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood style treatment. So
mm,
that is kind of a shame.
yep.
But to close off this section, the last series that I think I want to talk about, and I want to talk about it because it really is kind of at the bottom of this section for me, is Mahoka Koko no Retosei Rai Hosha, which I believe is the irregular at Magic High School is the English title, which is so this one I want to talk about a few things here. I certainly like certain aspects of it, and I liked it enough where I watched the whole first season. But I will say this is a problematic series on a number of levels. And I think if you're curious about whether you should pick this up, I'm sure a lot of people are because this has gotten a movie and a second season. And I am very surprised that it did, but it did fairly well. The big problems I think this show has that will probably and you can go read my review on animeevo.net. It's from quite a few years ago, so it might not be as good as some of my more recent stuff, but I think it gets the point across. And the point across is this is a very self absorbed series. It throws out a lot of terminology that it makes up and it treats it almost as a science. So that I think pisses off a lot of people. And then there's also that Wincest sister incest vibe going on that was that Orimo and light novels at the time really popularized. It's not it doesn't it's always hinted at from one side. It's not like as disgusting as I think Orimo ended up being.
High
But
bar.
that yeah. It's not it doesn't go completely down the drain and into the gutter. But it's got that weird tension and they play it for laughs, but it always makes me uncomfortable. But with all of that said, the action is exciting. A lot of the supporting cast is really, really interesting, even though they're kind of generic. What they do is they start off as generic characters and then slowly the story, just because it's long enough, builds on them to the point where they end up being the interesting thing. So I'm actually excited more about the side characters than the very Mary Stu or whatever you want to call the main character, who's kind of like, you know, has the personality of a rock. So that's my kind of thing about it. I will watch it because I'm invested in the side characters, and I'm honestly curious to see how this continues to go on. But that's my thoughts on it. What are your thoughts on it, Guardian Enzo?
Hate it. Hate it. I think it represents everything that's awful, every awful trope, every awful cliche, every awful lazy bit of writing that light novels and web novels represent, and full on disgusting Japanese nationalism strain to it as well, on top of all that. Which is not uncommon in light novels and web novels either, for the record, although that by no means do they all have it. But it's to me, it's intellectually, creatively lazy. It's reprehensible in terms of its worldview. I do loathe the main character, Marty Stew, Gary Stew, whatever you want to call him. I think he's particularly vile. But the whole thing is to me just awful, and I would love to pretend that it doesn't exist. So there you go. Don Machi, you mentioned that. I'm like, I'm fine. I'm neutral. I'm not neutral on this. I hate it.
Yeah, and I think if you don't like that stuff, I think that might be one of the reasons the nationalistic tone, which I'm a little bit oblivious about that stuff. I think so it kind of passes over my head sometimes. I also didn't detect it in Attack on Titan, though it did get very, very obvious in the latest season. But that stuff, that might be part of the appeal. It does check all the boxes that makes stuff popular. So uh that is kind of I think where we'll leave it.
Yeah, we should.
It's I think the reason it's in this section is because it's more of an for me at least, it's more of an intellectual curiosity of like why is this popular, and I can see the parts of it that I can enjoy, but I don't see how it's this mega hit that continues to get extra seasons. So we'll keep an eye on it. I might report back on it a little bit and let people know what's going on in our what we're watching segments, but maybe I'll just drop it after an episode or two. Who knows?
Okay.
But with that said, since we're now at the end of our list of stuff that we're curious about, there is one more section, which is
Main tab.
okay. So we've covered the stuff that we're excited about. We've covered the stuff that we're curious about. Now is the kind of I would say the consolation prize or the series that we still at least want to mention and stuff that we'll watch at least, and maybe some of you will as well. So this one we're gonna just do it quickly enough because I think neither of us have like the energy to devote too much more time to them. But we still want to highlight them. So I'll pass it over to you first, Guardian Enzo. Give me one and then I'll give you one.
Okay, well, good. So the lightning round begins. I'll start with Kami-sama ni Natahi, which finds Jun Maeda teaming up with PA Works again. I'm putting it on here basically because it's Maeda Jun, who, of course, is well known as the main scenario writer at Key. I've liked some of what he's done, Little Busters most prominently. Most people love him best for Clannad, which I'm kind of indifferent about, but I do really like Little Busters. And, some of Key's stuff, which he was the main scenario writer after Naoki Hisaya, especially after he left after Canon. So could be interesting. He's writing the music for it as well, and a lot of people really like his music. So there you go. Kami-sama ni Natahi.
Yes. So for me, the first one I'll say is Dragon Quest, Dai no Daiboken. Um, the only reason I want to mention it because I'm a fan of the game series, the RPGs, and I'm sure a lot of people are a fan of Dragon Quest as well. I am going to check it out and give it an episode. Video game adaptations in anime are typically not very good, and I have a sinking feeling that this will follow suit. But Dragon Quest really is kind of an open canvas. The stories are kind of threadbare in some respects. It's more about the grinding and all that other stuff. Although Dragon Quest 11, I've heard, which I haven't played yet, uh, did have a very interesting story. So we'll see how it turns out to be, and I'll let people know. What's your next one?
My next one is Noblesse, which I'm including because it's another manhwa, Korean manhwa adaptation, and another along with another one of the very most popular manhwas. I'm not as big a fan of this as Tower of God, Kami no To, but it is interesting to see these series starting to be actively mined by anime. It's got a couple of pretty good directors in Tada Shinsuke and Yamamoto Yasutaka over at Production IG. And like Tower of God, it's going with the K-pop OP and ED, which I think is kind of a nice touch. I've scanned through the manhwa, don't think it's particularly interesting. Did not think the preview was particularly interesting, but because it is a manhwa, because it is a very popular one, and it has a good staff and a good studio, it's worth mentioning. Noblesse.
Okay, so for my next one, I'm just gonna mention Akudama Drive, and the reason for that, honestly, if I'm being super honest, is the visual design looks really interesting. That that kind of gritty underground thing, that whole vibe is kind of interesting to me. It's another underground crime thing where there's an ordinary girl and she'll be caught up in this world of crime, and I'm kind of interested in it, but it doesn't look particularly original or unique. So I'll take a look. Maybe it'll surprise me. Studio Pero is doing it, so we'll see how it goes. And the interesting thing here is I think Funimation is getting this one exclusively. So there's some interesting things going on. We'll see how it goes. Next one from you, Guardian Enzo.
Okay. I also want to say a couple commenters on LAA did mention to me that Akudama Drive they thought was pretty good. So maybe I'll check it out too, even though I didn't preview it. The next one we talked about it briefly in the news a couple weeks ago for me is Taiso Samurai, which is the original gymnastics anime from the creators of Zombieland Saga. So it's a sports anime. Always interested in that. It's an original series sports anime. I'm not a huge Zombieland Saga fan, but it certainly could be an interesting perspective when applied to the sports manga template. It's again from Mappa, the most overworked studio in the business, but it's by design. That's their production. That's their business model. If you were a big Zombieland Saga fan or a big gymnastics fan, this is going to be a no-brainer for you. I'm neither one of those things, but I'm interested enough to definitely check it out. So Taiso Samurai.
All right. So that's it from me. Anything else you want to mention before we call this preview done?
Okay, a couple of brief quick hits that you can check out my short previews of these on my season preview posted LIA, but Lost in Anime. Hypnosis Mike, Division rap battle. Just kind of an odd route to anime this series has taken. So maybe potentially a little bit interesting to see what that's like. Kamitachi ni Haruwarata Otoko. It's one of those endless isekai light novels that some people have told me is, oh, this one is different. I'm skeptical at this point. I'll be checking it out. Inu to neko dochimo kateru to mainichi tanoshi, the fun life of a cat and a dog. It's a short, so you're not risking much, but I scanned a couple chapters of the manga. It looks pretty funny. The cat is very devious and worldly, and the dog is kind of innocent and Genki. So, which is kind of my view of how the world works anyway. So that could be interesting. And last, Maojo de Oyasumi, which is a gag manga about a princess who gets kidnapped by a demon lord, and she just wants to get a good night's sleep and isn't getting it, and she ends up being rather abusive towards the demon lord minions. Normally wouldn't interest me that much, but a lot of people I know say the manga, at least at the start, is very, very funny. So I'll be checking that out from a curiosity perspective. So those last ones, again, if you want to check it out, I have short previews on them on Lost in Anime.
All right, cool. And before, when I said we would be done, I did kind of lie. There is one more thing I want to talk about, and that's anime film. And I feel like anime film is harder to pin down in a season preview just because films are kind of on their own timeline and their own schedule. But there are some things that are coming out, and so I want to dedicate a little bit of time to mentioning some things that people could go and potentially see. Guardian Enzo, are there any films this season that you're looking forward to?
Yes, not so much because the OVA category is more or less dead. When I get past the series anime, it's theatrical films at this point, and theatrical anime is still doing okay. The first one I'll mention is Dounika Naru Hibi, which primarily interests me because it's an adaptation of a short work by Shimura Takako, who is the mangaka of Horo Musuko, which is one of my favorite manga of all time. And this one is basically short stories about romantic relationships between young people in modern Japan. Because it is Shimura, it's very kind of edgy in terms of what some people would consider conventional romantic relationships. It takes it in some different directions. Have not read the manga, but I do respect the author a lot, so I'll be interested in seeing. This is a Leiden Films, and it has Sato Takoya, who's a pretty good director. So I'll be interested to see what happens with it. And I don't know if I'll check it out at the theater. With current situation in the world, I have to be really, really motivated to go see something in the theater, but I'll certainly be interested. That would be my first pick. Do you have any movies you want to talk about?
Yeah, so I wanted to mention, and I mentioned it last week, was Violet Evergarden. The only reason I know it came out like this week, but it came out this week in Japan, and since it's related to Netflix, it is a movie and not a series, so we might get it a little quicker than like 6 months down the line. So I'm personally expecting that sometime in the fall season we'll get it, probably a month or two from now. At I'm hoping it anyway. So that I'm super excited for, and that's more of a Western release. But that's one thing I was definitely interested in, and I'll be waiting for when it drops on Netflix. Anything else from you?
Yeah, Josee to Tora to Sakana-tachi, which is a Christmas Day release from Bones, but it's currently doing the film festival circuit. And this is one of those, it's a novel adaptation. The novelist is Tanabe Seiko, and it had a live action film in 2003, which did very well. It's about a college student who befriends a girl in a wheelchair, and then has another romantic entanglement with another girl at his college. And it's supposedly, from what I hear, a pretty good novel, and the original movie was supposed to be pretty good. So darker than people may think. So that I'm interested in that. And the last one for me is Entotsu Machi no Poupelle, which is in English, it's Poupelle of Chimney Town. It's a Japanese picture book that has a very European look. Of course, it's the French title, but partially French title. So it obviously is consciously an effort to be a European style picture book. It's about a little kid who lives in a town with so many chimneys that's the sky is so smoky that you can't see anything but the smoke. In Studio 4C, can do some really interesting stuff. And if you look at the visuals from the original book that this is based on, the children's book, some of the artwork is really beautiful. So I'm curious to see what anime does with this. But I do think there is one more film that we're both sort of interested in that we want to talk about, isn't there?
Yes, and before I get to that, I do want to say I'm also excited about the two films you mentioned, especially Josee to Tora to Sakana-tachi, but I'm assuming it'll be a while before we get it in the West,
Yeah.
especially with COVID. But one thing we are getting this weekend actually is Made in Abyss, Dawn of the Deep Soul. So we talked about it on the news. It's being released via virtual screening this weekend. It came out actually yesterday. I was one of the people who spent the money on it. It's actually like Enzo said. It's a pay per view. So what you do is you pay $20 and you get a download link, or a streaming link rather, and you can only view it. I think you have a week to view it, and you can only view it once. So it's pretty pricey, and I suspect that even big Made in Abyss fans, that's a lot to ask. So the reason I mentioned it as a fall title is I assume it'll come out on Blu-ray and DVD a bit quicker and probably more close to the holiday season. So for most people, this will probably be a fall 2020 movie. You've already seen it though, right? It came out in Japan a while
Yeah,
ago.
I saw it in Japanese in the theater. The Blu-ray is actually coming out next week in Japan. So, um, yeah, like we said in that news discussion, it's a dark ride, man. But it's Made in Abyss. The one thing I want to mention that I thought was kind of funny, and you may have seen this story this week, but there was a sumo wrestler in Tokyo who somehow or another got wind of Made in Abyss and became a Made in Abyss fan. And there was a news story about how this guy showed everyone at his sumo studio or whatever they call. I've forgotten now. I'm sorry what they call the studio group, the sumo group. But all of the sumo wrestlers, he made them all watch Made in Abyss, and he said all the sumo wrestlers cried watching Made in Abyss, which I wish there had been cameras for that because I think. But that's Made in Abyss, the series that can make sumo wrestlers cry. And yeah, it's I love this is a really I mean, it's a Made in Abyss. If you know Made in Abyss, it's a dark it's a dark series. Disturbing to the point where you even sometimes feel like maybe too disturbing in some respects. To the yes, there are things about this series that sometimes even make me uncomfortable. The author has almost a fetishistic interest in children suffering, I would say, and nudity for that matter. But it's also incredibly deep and dark and beautiful and visually it's incredible what Kinema Citrus has done with this. But it's the movie is everything you'd imagine the movie is. It's Made in Abyss on steroids. It's all manga material, but it's amped up to 11 for the big screen. So if you love the series, everything that you love about Made in Abyss, and everything that unmakes you about Made in Abyss will probably be even more intact when you see the movie.
All right, that is actually a really solid and positive and negative, but mostly positive point to end the preview on. So that about wraps up the preview, and with that, we'll transition over to the landing for this podcast.
Conclusion.
And with that, I think it's time for us to wrap up another episode of Notaku Anime Chat. So, generally, before we end the episode, we like to dive into listener questions. We are actually not going to do that this week because you guys are all amazing, the people who listen to this, and you submitted a ton of really interesting questions. In fact, one of the questions that we got, I almost want to hold off even next week and do a actual topic of the week on, but we'll get into that next week. So apologies for all the people that were expecting to get their stuff heard this week. We just went pretty in depth on the season preview, and I think we will give your questions they're due next week, and we might do a slightly longer listener questions section next week. So that's the decision we made. Guardian Enzo, anything to add on that front?
Yeah, just to say sincerely thank you to the readers at Lost in Anime who really came through with a lot of these questions. They're really good questions, and actually, I even did some research on these questions. One of them, particularly, I talked to an industry person on this because I really wanted to know. So yeah, they're great questions. Like Setsuken said, we wanted the reason we're not doing them here is because this was really a special edition, and we wanted to devote this mostly to the season preview. But we are very very passionate about the listener questions, and we will get to these questions, and we just want to give them an opportunity to really shine, which is why we're going to dive into them next week.
Yes, and next week, look forward to some really interesting discussions. With that said, I think that's it for us this week. The one thing I will plug is check out Anime Evo and lostinanime.com for the season previews. My website, I don't know if I'll be doing one, but Guardian Enzo already has his up on Lost in Anime. And then Flare Knight should have his season preview up on our site. So go check those out. Comment. So we might go more in depth. I know Guardian Enzo covered a few series there that we didn't get into too much detail on. So check that out. As always, like, subscribe on YouTube, ring the bell notification. I always wanted to say that. And also, obviously, subscribe on your podcast service of choice. We're on Spotify, Overcast, iTunes, most of the things you name it, we're on it. We were even on Google Podcasts, but for some reason, um, it's hard to find us on there. But if you have any issues with that, write into us and we'll figure that out as well. With that said, you can also reach either of us on Twitter with me at Setsuken and Guardian Enzo at Guardian Enzo. So before we go, Guardian Enzo, any last words?
Yeah, there's another Twitter they should know about, isn't there?
Oh, yes. I totally forgot about that. So, what we also did, and what you might want to follow, is at Notaku Pod, which is our Notaku Podcast official Twitter account. So, we'll be posting updates, news, and obviously all the episodes as they release with some interesting behind the scenes stuff. So, follow that as well. And we will see you again soon.
That's right. And last plug for me, from my pals over at Random Curiosity, their season preview post should be out in the next couple of days too, if it's not already out by the time this goes live. And I did contribute a little bit. I always contribute a little bit to that podcast as well, to that preview as well. So please check out the season preview post at RC in addition to Anime Evo and Lost in Anime. And with that, yeah, back to you. But thanks to everybody for listening. As always, it's great to be with you.
Yes, and don't worry, Guardian Enzo isn't contributing to any other podcasts. He signed his
No,
soul with
no, no,
Notaku.
no. Absolutely, I'm monogamous with podcasts.
Awesome. All right, guys, take care. See ya.
Bye.